individual, and the matter is now sub judice. Members should take care not to say anything in the House that might prejudice a criminal trial. I will therefore urge members to avoid speculating about the guilt or innocence of an individual or the motive for the attacks. The Home Secretary may wish to make factual statements for the record. Members may wish to ask about the emergency services, the response to the attacks, the support to victims and families, and connected matters. But I urge the utmost caution in avoiding any remarks that might prejudice a future trial. I now call the Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I would like to make a statement on the horrific events that took place on the East Coast Main Line on Saturday evening. I am sure I speak for everyone in this House when I say that my thoughts today are first and foremost with the victims, with their family and their friends, and all those who experienced this terrifying attack. My deepest thanks go to the emergency services, the British Transport Police, Cambridgeshire Police, Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue, and the East of England Ambulance Service. The speed of their response, as well as their skill and professionalism, were exemplary. I would also like to pay tribute to the breathtaking bravery of those on the train itself, including the heroic acts of the passengers and train crew who intercepted the attacker. I would like to draw particular attention to one member of the onboard crew who ran towards danger, confronting the attacker for a sustained period of time and stopped his advance through the train. He put himself in harm's way, suffered grievous injuries as a result, and remains in hospital today in a critical but stable condition. On Saturday, he went to work to do his job. Today, he is a hero and forever will be. Mr. Speaker, there is now a live investigation into what happened on Saturday night and the events that led up to it. I am therefore limited in what I can say today without putting successful prosecution at risk, and I am sure that all here agree that there must be one priority right now, and that is bringing the person who committed this horrific crime to justice. However, I will share what facts I can. At 7:42 p.m. on Saturday evening, police were contacted about an incident on a train travelling from Doncaster to London, with reports of several stabbings on board. The quick thinking of the driver saw the train diverted to Huntingdon Station. Within 8 minutes of the first 999 call, police had boarded the train and brought the attack to an end. 10 people were taken to hospital by the ambulance services, 8 of whom had life-threatening injuries. A further individual later self-presented at the hospital. 3 people have now been discharged, whilst 8 remain in hospital. I know that everyone in this House wishes them the swiftest and fullest recoveries possible. And I would like to thank the staff at Cambridge University Hospital for their life-saving care. I can confirm, as was reported over the weekend, that Operation Plato, the National Police identifier for a terrorist attack, was declared. However, it was rescinded once the incident had been contained. The British Transport Police remain the lead force in this investigation. They stated yesterday that while counter-terrorism policing were initially involved, they have found, and I quote, nothing to suggest that this was a terrorist incident. At the scene, the police made 2 arrests. Since then, 1 man has been released who we now know was not involved. As of this morning, the other, one Anthony Williams, has been charged. In relation to the events in Huntingdon, he has been charged with 10 counts of attempted murder, 1 count of possession of a knife, and 1 of actual bodily harm. He has also been charged with a further count of attempted murder and possession of a bladed article in relation to events on a Docklands Light Railway train in the early hours of Saturday morning at London's Pontoon Dock. And Cambridgeshire Police have, in the last few hours, reported additional earlier sightings and possible further offences. As is standard practice in these cases, they have now referred themselves to the Independent Office of Police Conduct, the IOPC, for independent scrutiny of their handling of these reports. For now, there is little I can say about this man and his past, beyond confirming that he is a British national and was born in this country, and that he was not known to the security services, counter-terror policing or prevent. I know this House and the public will have many unanswered questions today about who this attacker was and about the events that led up to the attack. Those questions will be answered, but it will take time. The police and prosecutors must be allowed to do their work. Since Saturday's attack, the British Transport Police have increased their presence at key points in the transport network, though it should be noted that their operational assessment of the risk posed on our trains has not changed, as this was an isolated attack. It was also, of course, a knife crime. This government is committed to halving knife crime within a decade, and progress has been made this year. We have taken 60,000 knives off of our streets, banned zombie knives and ninja swords, and seen a 5% fall in all knife crimes, including an 18% reduction in homicides by knife. I know that ideas have already been suggested about how policing should change in response to this event. Once the facts are known, we must examine what more might have been done to stop this horrific attack from ever occurring, and whether there are measures that we must now take to better protect the public on our streets and on our trains. However, that must be done when all of the facts are available to us. Madam Deputy Speaker, the thoughts of the whole House are today with the victims of this horrific crime, their families and their friends, and all affected by what happened on Saturday night. The sickening act of the man who committed this crime was the very worst of humanity. But the actions of those who responded, who ran towards danger to save the lives of people they did not know, was the very best of us. I know we all share in paying tribute to their extraordinary bravery today, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State Chris Phil.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement. Our thoughts are with the victims of this appalling attack and their families, as the Home Secretary quite rightly said. I join her in paying tribute to the emergency services who responded so fast, and to the brave interventions by members of the public and the train staff that prevented an even worse tragedy from occurring. They are truly heroes. This attack has horrified and shocked the whole nation. People simply travelling by train were indiscriminately attacked. The horror the passengers experienced will likely stay with them forever. Anthony Williams has now been charged. As the Home Secretary said, he had been involved in previous incidents in Peterborough, and in the early hours of Saturday morning was also allegedly involved in an attack on the Docklands Right Railway in London. Will she confirm, as I've been told, that police in London knew Williams' identity following that? And if so, were Cambridgeshire police informed so they could track him down? In essence, I'm asking, were there any opportunities to have prevented this from occurring? The Home Secretary said that Williams was not previously known to the security services, counter-terrorism policing or Prevent. Can she also tell the House if Williams was previously known to the police more widely or to mental health services? Mr. Speaker, this all comes just weeks after a murderous Islamist terror attack on a Manchester synagogue and just days after the horrendous murder of Wayne Broadhurst by an Afghan asylum seeker, both using knives. Although homicide has thankfully fallen by about 15% since 2010, and as the Home Secretary said, knife crime has fallen in recent years, every homicide and every knife attack is one too many. I saw, together with the Police Minister, the grief this causes at the funeral of a 15-year-old girl, Eliane Andam, murdered in Croydon just over 2 years ago. So, speaking in general, not in relation to this incident, Does the Home Secretary agree that knife crime and knife homicide are still too high and we must do yet more? Does she agree that more knife crime offenders should go to jail? This is important because when offenders are in jail, they of course can't attack the public. Does she agree we need to ensure more people who carry knives, especially where they use them to threaten others, are jailed? I know of course there are pressure on prison places, but by deporting more of the 10,000 foreign nationals in prison, we could create more space. Madam Deputy Speaker, we also need to take more knives off our streets. And that means we have to dramatically increase the use of stop and search. A study this year by Professor Lawrence Sherman, the Met's former Chief Scientific Officer, found that raising stop and search levels in London to 2011 levels would lead to a 1/3 reduction in knife homicide. Some people complain that stop and search is used disproportionately in relation to some groups, but when measured in relation to the offending population, the disproportionality disappears, as set out by a recent policy exchange study. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we should triple the use of stop and search to get knives off our streets and introduce year-round surge policing in the top 5% of high crime hotspots, which will of course include many train stations. We must also use technology more. There is work underway at the Home Office, which I know about, to develop technology to scan for knives at a distance, which it is hoped can distinguish knives from keys or mobile phones. And this, of course, could help police rapidly identify those carrying a knife in a public place. I wonder if the Home Secretary could provide an update on that development work, either straight away or, if you prefer, perhaps in writing later, because I really do think it could make a big difference. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, retrospective and live facial recognition can also identify wanted criminals, including those involved in knife crime. In Croydon Town Centre, the borough which the Police Minister and I represent in Parliament, in the last couple of years, around 200 wanted criminals, including 2 wanted rapists and others guilty of knife crime, who would not otherwise have been caught, were arrested using live facial recognition, and crime in Croydon Town Centre, including knife crime, has gone down as a result. The images of innocent passers-by are immediately and automatically deleted, addressing civil liberties concerns. So I really do hope the Home Secretary agrees and the Police Minister agrees that rolling out this technology nationally will have a dramatic impact on improving public safety, and they will certainly have my full support if they choose to do that. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know everyone in this House wants to see knife crime eradicated, more today, I'm sure, than ever before. So I hope the House will also support the tough steps needed to eradicate knife crime, because we owe the victims of these appalling crimes actions as well as words.
Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Shadow Home Secretary for his remarks, and in particular, as he opened his response, I know that the bravery of all of those who faced this attack on Saturday is something that has unanimous support across this House, and I thank him for the spirit in which he reflected that. He will know, in relation, as I said in my opening statement, in relation to the events in Peterborough, they are now the subject of an IOPC investigation. It's important that I don't say anything that seeks to get ahead of that, but I'm sure all of those questions will be answered in the fullness of time, and it is standard practice where there has been contact with police in the run-up to an event like this that those matters are referred to the IOPC to investigate and consider. He'll also know that I can't say anything in relation to the suspect who's been charged and any prior history or indeed any mental health issues, because that would also be facts that are material to any future court proceedings, and it would be inappropriate for me or indeed anybody else in this House to comment or speculate on those matters today. And I would just ask that the words of the Speaker at the opening of this part of our session are remembered as we pose questions today. I agree with him him that knife crime is far too high. This government is impatient to do everything it can to eliminate knife crime. It's why we've set ourselves an ambitious target, and we're pleased to have made some progress, though I agree with him that there is still much more to be done. And I hope on knife crime in particular, instead of playing politics across this House, where there is consensus, we are all able to work together in the spirit of trying to bring down the scourge of knife crime in our country. As I say, the numbers have gone in a positive direction, and I hope he will welcome that and work with us as we seek to make more progress. He referred to sentencing in particular. I do have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's disappointing when members opposite do not reckon with the scale of the crisis in our prison system. This government inherited a prison system on the brink of collapse. It has meant difficult decisions ever since we have entered office in order to prevent this country from running out of prison places entirely. He will know that this government has deported more foreign national offenders since our term of office than was the case in the previous record under the previous government. Despite deporting record numbers of foreign national offenders, the scale of crisis in the prison system means that there are still more prisoners coming into the system than there have been places, and it is important, therefore, that the sentencing reforms are seen in that context. He will know, though, that it is the case that those who are in possession of a knife and who have been using that in a threatening manner do attract, the majority of those people do attract reasonably lengthy prison sentences. When we know more about the circumstances of this particular case, we will know if there are other lessons for us to draw and other areas of policy for us to consider. He referenced stop and search and he, I think, lamented the issues around disproportionality. I hope I'm not putting too much of a spin on his remarks. I would just gently remind him it was a former Tory Home Secretary in the first 2010 to 15 Parliament that started speaking about disproportionate use of stop and search powers and changed the rules around stop and search to reflect the disproportionate use of that power back then. That has been the record of the previous government, but I hope he will recognise that the police already have the power to use stop and search indiscriminately where the intelligence suggests that that is required. That is an operational decision for police chiefs, and of course the decision as to whether to stop and search someone where there are reasonable grounds and suspicion is an individual operational decision for individual police officers. This is a well-used power, it is a well-understood power, it is an important power that is in our arsenal for tackling criminality, and this government fully supports its lawful use. Let me also say on live facial recognition, it's this government that will very soon be consulting on a new legal framework to underpin the use of live facial recognition. He will know that when his party was in power, it was left to individual police forces, and I believe it was South Wales and the Met who first rolled live facial recognition out, faced lots of legal challenges as a result thereof. The government did not then change their policy, but this government will consult on a legal framework so that all police forces across the country can use live facial recognition technology, confident that they will not find themselves defending those decisions in courts in the future. And I've also supported the rollout of 10 specific live facial recognition units across the country, and will look to do more as well in the coming months. In relation to scans for knives, let me just say to him on tech more broadly, I think there is much more that we can do to use new and emerging technology in order to help us tackle this type of criminality, and I'm happy to write to him about our current plans, but I will be setting out more in terms of our broader position in the coming weeks. Madam Deputy Speaker, knife crime is a terrible, terrible crime. It claims far too many lives in our country. It is important that we keep doing everything we can to bear down on the damage that knife crime causes and provide pathways for those who get caught up in the carrying of knives. That is an important bit of policy that we will carry on working on. But in relation to the attack that we are talking about primarily today, I do urge the House that before we draw broader policy conclusions, we wait until more of the facts are known.
Select Committee Chair Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for all her remarks, and also the Secretary of State for Transport, who's here today, for her comments on the media this morning. And I share, as all members of this House do, their concern for the victims and their families, and her recognition of the heroism of so many in this tragedy on Saturday. On behalf of my colleagues on the Transport Committee, I would like to pay particular tribute to all the staff of Avanti West Coast and Network Rail who responded so quickly, and in particular to the train driver who reacted so promptly to get the train to Huntingdon in order that the emergency services could meet it, and also to the onboard staff member who is in hospital after protecting passengers. Now, I know that people may be nervous of travelling by train now, and I thank the work the government and the police services have done to ensure additional police presence at our rail stations, as I saw at Waterloo as I came on my way in here earlier. Now, given that the Home Secretary said the British Transport Police have said that their operational assessment of the risk posed on our trains has not changed, as this was an isolated attack, will the Home Secretary assure me that any long-term changes to security on our rail services will be considered very carefully, and once the full facts of this incident are known, and not rushed into without considering the potential downsides that may impact on the ease of travel by train?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her question. It's always a balance in terms of ease of travel for millions of people every single day, and making sure that people are safe. And of course, this government, the Transport Secretary and the rest of government will make sure that any arrangements we have, whether we remain with the current arrangements or anything that might change in the future, always strikes the right balance. That's the most important thing. But for now, based on our current understanding of this attack, the risk assessment has not changed. And although we're providing more reassurance to people so they feel safe getting on the trains in the aftermath of this attack, at this point there are no proposals to go further, but we will of course review that once more of the facts are known.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Max Wilkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This attack has left 11 people in hospital, one of them a member of the train staff who is in a critical but stable condition. My party's thoughts are with all those affected, the victims, their loved ones and everyone who witnessed such a shocking event. We also want to thank the emergency services and rail staff for their swift response, as well as the passengers who intervened to prevent further harm. After this sort of incident, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is vital the police are given the time and space they need to establish the full facts. That is ever more difficult due to the rapid spread of disinformation online in the immediate aftermath of these sort of attacks. Within hours, social media was flooded with speculation over the ethnicity and race of the perpetrator, inciting racist and Islamophobic comments. And when communities were still reeling from the horror of this attack, certain political figures on the hard right, including members of the Reform Party, were already seeking to exploit the incident for political gain. Desperate to involve themselves in the tragedy, they reached for their dog whistles. They threw around baseless opinions on levels of crime when facts were available. They were shamelessly trying to turn tragedy into yet another excuse to whip up fear and sow division. The Shadow Home Secretary's comments today also veered into that realm. Never is an opportunity to blame foreigners missed. That is beneath contempt. At moments like this, those who aspire to leadership must calm fears and attempt to unite, not inflame tensions. Does the Home Secretary share my view that while knife crime must be tackled forcefully, it's important that all of us must respond with arguments grounded in fact rather than trying to stoke fear? Can the Home Secretary confirm whether the government holds data on violent incidents involving knives or sharp instruments where 3 or more victims were harmed in a single incident? If so, what is the trend over the past 2 years or any other time frame the Home Secretary has data for? And finally, the Home Secretary has said that the individual was not known to anti-terror police or Prevent. But when the facts are known, will she confirm that proper lessons will be learned about individuals who may pose a risk, be it as a result of mental health issues, an obsession with extreme violence, or other relevant factors?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Look, I deplore the ease with which so many armchair warriors feel the need to speculate and spread misinformation on social media. It's why it's important that the police and all of our emergency services are able to proceed with their investigations at pace, but also transparently, so as to calm down any tensions that might arise as a result of misinformation that spreads particularly across social media. In terms of how other people may or may not have reacted, I tend to think at moments of such crisis, people normally reveal their true colours, and I will leave my remarks about other individuals there. He is right that knife crime must be tackled forcefully. As I said in my earlier remarks, we've seen an 18% decrease in murders by knife. I will make sure he receives the further stats that he mentioned, but as I said earlier, the data in relation to knife crime is going in a better direction, but I, like others in this House, am impatient to see more change more quickly, and I hope he will work with us on a cross-party basis on all measures needed in order to do that. And of course, when all of the facts around this case are known and understood, I will ensure that any lessons that there are to be learned will be learned and will be acted upon.
Sam Carling.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I take this opportunity to put on record my thanks to the first responders, the police, and everyone on the train who put their lives at risk to protect others. So many people from the communities I represent in both Peterborough and Huntingdonshire have written to me today in absolute fear, shock and confusion at how this can happen so close to home, particularly after we found out this morning that the charged individual is from my constituency. And I've had constituents really worried as well and alarmed about these reports over the last few hours that the offender may possibly have been involved in further incidents in Peterborough and London. So will the Home Secretary join me in calling for community cohesion following this incident, and also ensure that a full investigation takes place into those possible other offences?
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and I can only imagine how terrifying it must have been for his constituents and those in neighbouring areas to hear news of this horrifying attack. He'll know I can't say any more at the moment about other potential incidents. They are the subject of further investigation, and as more facts are confirmed by the police, we will be able to say more. And of course, the IOPC must be allowed to do their work. And on community cohesion more broadly, of course, when we know more about the facts of this case, we'll know whether this relates to community cohesion or whether it relates to wider community issues. I would encourage members to wait until more of the facts are known before we draw those broader conclusions, but I do agree with him that it is necessary that we reassure communities in his constituency and across the country. That's why there is an increased police presence across the transport network, and it's why this government will make sure that as we know more, whether there are lessons to be learnt, that they will be learnt and acted upon.
Ben Obsijekti.
This has been a difficult and challenging weekend for Huntingdon. My thoughts are with the victims of this terrible tragedy, to the LNER crew member whose heroic and selfless actions, placing himself in harm's way, saved lives at the cost of his own safety, and who remains in a critical but stable condition. To the other 4 victims who remain in hospital with stab wounds, and to the 4 who were discharged yesterday, as well as those who bore witness to the attacks and will still be processing their own experiences. I would like to place on record my praise for the emergency services response to Cambridgeshire Constabulary, whose unarmed response officers and firearms officers were able to place Anthony Williams in custody within 8 minutes of receiving the 999 call. To Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue Services, our Air Ambulance Services, and to the East of England Ambulance Trust for their incident response and for getting the casualties to Adam Brooks Hospital. Also to the train driver, Andrew Johnson, and signalling staff, whose speed of thought in moving the train onto the suburban line from the high-speed line meant that the train could make the unscheduled stop at Huntingdon, a decision that curtailed the attack by several crucial minutes, allowed the police to apprehend the suspect, and undoubtedly saved lives. The swift action of all those involved prevented a horrific attack from being far, far worse. I'm sure the Home Secretary and indeed the whole House would wish to share in my sympathies for those impacted by this horrific attack and my pride in the conduct, leadership and professionalism of the responders and railway staff.
Well said.
Well, can I thank the honourable member for both his question today, but also for his own work over the weekend. He was very quick to arrive at the scene, and I thought that the honourable member handled himself with great honour and reflected in a very measured way the initial response to such a horrifying incident in his constituency. I think the way he's handled himself is a credit to him and to the people that he represents. And I, of course, agree with him in relation to his remarks about the bravery of all of those who were responding, the speed of the response, but also the bravery of those inside the train itself as well. And let me assure him that myself and my officials stand ready to work with him and others who are locally on the ground to make sure all lessons are learned as we move forward.
Andrew Pakes.
Thank you, Speaker. And can I associate myself with the comments about sympathy and empathy for the victims of this? The names of Peterborough and the town of my constituency of my right honourable friend Huntingdon have flashed up across the news and around the world this weekend because of the terrible events we've seen happening on Saturday night. Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't want my constituency to be known just because of the acts of a single perpetrator. So can I pay my tribute to the police, the train staff, the first responders and others who stepped forward when the actions were needed to do that. And can I also pay particular tribute to my own constituent, train driver Andrew Johnson, and his ASLEF and RMT colleagues on LNER who went beyond the call of duty on that evening. They showed the best of British values and the true face of the county I represent and its people. We don't know all of the information yet, but there is great anxiety in Huntingdon and in Peterborough from many people locally, as well as this being a national issue. So can I ask my right honourable friend, can she confirm that we will go and move every mile to tackle knife crime, ensure our streets and public transport remain safe for everyone?
And they reacted with immense bravery and undoubtedly saved countless lives.
Dame Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement and associate myself with the tributes that have been paid to the emergency services, the train crew, and our thoughts with the victims. When we have more information, I'm sure my committee will want to look at what actually happened and learn lessons from it. But can I draw the Home Secretary's attention to our current inquiry on new forms of radicalisation? And can I ask that if there are things that come out of this inquiry that are relevant for my inquiry, my committee's inquiry, that we make sure that we learn those points and include them as soon as possible?
Well, can I thank the Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee for the points that she has just made, and I look forward to working with her closely as we learn more of the lessons once all the facts in relation to this case are known. She is right more broadly, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we are seeing many new forms of radicalisation in this country and across Europe and North America in particular as well. And it is important that we are always stress testing and challenging the response that government has to tackling those new forms of radicalisation. It will need a change, I think, longer term in our understanding of what motivates serious violent behaviour, and I'm sure that is work that she and her committee will continue with, and I pledge to work with them as we try to tease out more answers to these particular problems.
Florence Shalami.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to associate my remarks with everyone who's made powerful tributes to both the train driver, the staff and members of the public, and I think this demonstrates why it is really important for us to have more than one person on the train. The train guards play a vital role in protecting passengers. My constituency is home to both Vauxhall and Waterloo, busy mainline stations. In under 6 weeks, we're going to have millions of people travelling on the public network service coming home for Christmas. Those people need to be reassured that train travel is an efficient and good way in terms of travelling across the country. My honourable friend, the Home Secretary, mentioned that there will be additional resources across the network for the next few weeks. Will that go on into that busy Christmas period? And this is an issue which obviously covers with the Department for Transport. There is the strange funding mechanism for the British Transport Police. Transport geeks will know that it's actually funded by the industry, not directly from the Home Office. But as we take on more control of the public network and the train service, this will fall onto the government. Is this an area that the Home Secretary and the Transport Secretary will be looking at and making sure we've got a fully funded British Transport Police to protect people travelling on public transport?
I thank my honourable friend for her question. The first thing I would say, Madam Deputy Speaker, is thankfully incidents as we saw on Saturday are very rare, and our train system is generally speaking very safe, and millions of people use it every day without incident. So we have a strong base, I think, to build on. But of course, given what has happened and the horrifying nature of the attack and the indiscriminate way in which victims were stabbed whilst on that train on Saturday, it is important, I think, that British Transport Police have made that decision to increase police presence across the railway network. It's an operational decision for them as to how extensive that is and how long that goes on, but we have a very good working relationship with British Transport Police. I've been very impressed with their response to this attack. I've been working very closely with them over the weekend. I do pay tribute to them and all of their officers, and I will be led by British Transport Police in terms of the operational decisions that they are making. On the wider policy questions that she raises, as more of the network is nationalised, I will of course pick up those conversations with the Transport Secretary.
Charles.
Deputy Speaker, more generally on knife crime, isn't there a disconnect though between what magistrates are able to do? For example, under the Restriction of Offensive Weapons Act, somebody can get a custodial sentence, let's say 51 weeks, and yet under the government's current sentencing bill, there will be a presumption that a 12-month custodial sentence will not be required. So I just wondered what the Home Secretary might do to try and get around that, to ensure that the magistrates do have more powers, more sentencing powers, given that, yes, possession of a knife is not the use of a knife, but clearly the one so often sadly does lead to the other. So there's clearly a legislative disconnect, and I hope the Home Secretary will look at that. Thank you.
Well, can I thank him for his question? He will know the average sentence for threatening with a knife is actually more than a year. It's around 15 months. It wouldn't be caught by the presumption in the current sentencing bill. I would also say to him, it's a presumption within the sentencing bill, not a blanket ban on sentences of under 12 months. There is still discretion for judges in all cases, and the bill does set out the circumstances in which that presumption can be overridden. It will always be a matter for the independent judiciary based on the facts of the case in front of them.
Start by joining others in expressing sympathy to all those who've been affected. My thanks to the emergency services, the members of the public who got involved, and of course that train crew who acted heroically to protect their passengers. The Home Secretary will understand that there is given the developments today and her statement on the incident in East London Pontoon Dock in my constituency, there's a great deal of anxiety and fear amongst my constituents of West Ham and Beckton. I'd like to place my thanks on the record my thanks to the police for their engagement this afternoon with me. What assurances can she give to my constituents on the safety on public transport, particularly in East London, where we have a lot of smaller, unstaffed, open access, Dockland-like railway stations that are used and are essential to the daily life of my constituents?
Well, my honourable friend will know I'm limited in terms of what I can say, given it's a live police investigation. The police have obviously confirmed some of those facts already, but their investigation must be allowed to continue without further speculation. But he makes a good point on, and I can well understand why people in his constituency or those who regularly use this particular station will feel concerned. It is why BTP have increased patrols in order to provide additional reassurance to the community. We have nothing that suggests that that was a particular location of interest at this point, and I hope that that does reassure his constituents.
Could I echo tributes to train staff and to the emergency services, to her and her team, who I'm sure were working flat out all weekend. Obviously, the case is going through an investigation, but could I urge her to, given the events of Saturday and the run-up to Saturday night, could I urge her to bring together police chiefs to talk about information sharing and any further resource they require? And, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm happy to admit we should not have diluted stop and search, but could I now urge her to look again at stop and search? Northern Ireland is much more permissive, and Section 60 does need to be reviewed.
Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question and for his remarks. My experience over the weekend in terms of the different police forces and different emergency services who responded to this attack is actually that they work together very well, and I was very pleased to see that level of coordination, especially when different forces are responsible for different things. But you know, at the start of this incident, counter-terror police were supporting the investigation. That was stood down, but if it had needed to be stood up again, I know that that would have been almost instantaneous as soon as the request was made. So my initial experience of and impression of the collaborative working has been very positive, and I do pay tribute to everyone involved in that over the weekend. On information sharing, I will take that away because I think that, and reflect on what he said, it is important, especially when there's such a huge incident taking place in the country with lots of information going out through different forms, that we make sure there is complete coordination. If he has any specific concerns in relation to this incident, I'd be very happy for him to write to me, and I will ensure that I respond, but I will pick up that conversation with the NPCC and others as well. And look, let me just reassure him on stop and search. I think this is a very valuable tool that the police have. I will always want to see it used wherever it is appropriate to do so. My understanding and my conversations with police so far suggest that from their operational perspective, the powers they have work quite well. But of course, I will always be open-minded and be willing to look again at any of these issues should the advice from police change, or should the experience that we have of the way that the powers are used change as well.
Picture.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If I can start by just associating myself with the many tributes that have been given today to those people on the train that tried to prevent the attack, the staff and the responders. As a member of Doncaster East and Isle of Axome, I use the Doncaster King's Cross service most weeks. I know many of my constituents and people across Doncaster are deeply shaken by this appalling attack, but that service is an indispensable part of our lives. So will my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, set out the immediate steps that she's taken to reassure passengers who use that line, but also the best way that we communicate that to ensure that they have peace of mind as they travel on those trains over the next few days?
Well, look, I think we should all take confidence from the speed of the emergency services response to this attack, which has drawn justified and wide praise across this House today. As I say, the speed of that response meant the attack was brought to an end as quickly as possible, and many lives, I believe, were saved as a result of that response. And I do think that whilst the incident itself is deeply shocking, and I can fully understand that people who use the service on a regular basis will be feeling shaken by this news. The fact that our emergency services were able to respond so quickly, I think, is something that we should all be confident in and take pride in. And then, of course, the British Transport Police have increased police presence across the network in order to provide more reassurance to people. But as I say, thankfully, in this country, incidents of this nature across our transport network are very, very rare. And I think everyone in this House will want to work together to make sure that remains the case.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I join the Home Secretary and my constituency neighbour, the Honourable Member for Huntingdon, in their thoughts for the victims and their families, and also in paying tribute to Cambridgeshire Police, Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue, the East of England Ambulance Service, the staff at Adam Brooks Hospital, and of course the train crew and passengers for their response on Saturday evening. Now, while respecting the ongoing investigation and the IOPC process, can she assure the House that the extraordinary bravery and professionalism demonstrated by all those involved in containing this incident and providing life-saving care will be properly recognised in due course?
Well, I thank the Honourable Member, and I, of course, absolutely agree with everything he said in praise of all of those who responded to this attack. I will make sure that once we are through court proceedings and the full facts of the incident are known, there will be an appropriate moment to be able to thank all of our emergency services and the brave passengers in an appropriate way when the time is right.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam.
Close.
All the LNER train crew and train driver involved in the action. Their swift action and their extensive training to respond to emergencies was undoubtedly critical to saving many lives. Railway staff will be deeply concerned that this terrible incident has taken place against a backdrop of year-on-year increases on violent assaults on rail staff. What conversations is the Home Secretary having with the Department for Transport colleagues regarding resources and support needed to keep rail staff and passengers safe on our railways?
Well, I know that from my conversations with the Transport Secretary over the weekend, these are issues that are very much on her mind. And of course, there is crossover with those of us in the Home Office, but primarily the responsibility sits with the Transport Secretary. I will make sure that she gets a fuller response to her question, but she should rest assured that in this government, we recognise that assaults on any of our public sector workers are unacceptable, and the government will always do everything it can to stamp that out.
Barclay.
Madam Deputy Speaker, could I join my fellow Cambridgeshire MPs in the tributes they've made? The Home Secretary, in her statement, indicated she was receptive to the deployment of facial recognition at railway stations. Could she clarify on the current timeline, what's the earliest date that would be deployed more widely? And given some of the early lessons coming out of this case, what scope is there for the government to accelerate that timeline?
Well, the consultation that I referred to in my earlier remarks in terms of the legal framework for much wider use of live facial recognition will just be in the next few weeks, so that's all but upon us. I referred to the funding for 10 new mobile units which has been made available, and British Transport Police is preparing a pilot of live facial recognition technology at selected railway stations in London. It will run for a period of 6 months. The exact dates will be public in due course, and I will make sure we write to him with those when they are decided.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With LNER headquartered in my constituency of York, I have written to David Horn, the Managing Director, to offer my support to him and pass on my best wishes to his crew. I also want to put on record my thanks to the signallers who made it possible to shift the train onto the line, who are also based in my constituency of York. Last summer, I sought to amend the Crime and Policing Bill with an amendment to provide greater protections for transport staff in the light of the increased risks they are facing. With the bill about to enter committee stage in the House of Lords, will the Home Secretary look at my amendments again and ensure that we do provide those protections for transport staff?
Honourable friend, I'll happily discuss with her the content of her earlier amendment, and even if not accepted for the bill, I'll ensure that the policy question that she's raising is picked up by our colleagues in the Transport Department.
We are running out of time, so I'll ask the questions to be short and, of course, the answers as well. Stephen Gethings.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, can I put on the record our best wishes to the victims and our thanks to the emergency services and railway staff who did a remarkable job. I know she can't comment on the case in particular, but one concern that I have is around the speculation and disinformation that is rife on social media. Can she make it her job to maybe have a conversation with the social media companies, because that kind of speculation does no service to the victims or to the police who are pursuing this issue?
The most important thing is that official sources of information are able to be as transparent as quickly as possible, so the vast majority of this country that doesn't just get its news from social media knows what is happening. Of course, there'll be a role for the Online Safety Act in future as well.
Sir.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I do thank the Secretary of State for her statement and for bringing it to us so promptly. I use LNER every week to come to this place, and I always knew the staff were great, but I didn't realise they were heroes. And I think the response we've seen from both the staff and the public on the train really was the best of Britain. But I think the response of social media was absolutely shameful, if I'm honest. Absolutely shameful. And it shames us as a country, actually. Yeah. But LNER does connect Edinburgh South West to destinations north and south. And I'm sure my residents will be really pleased to hear what they are looking at facial recognition on the transport network, because I think it's incredibly important. But if I can talk about knife crime more generally, in June the government gave a commitment to look at round-tip knives, the manufacture and sale of them, and hopefully mandating that. Is the Home Secretary able to give us an update on this? And I'm sorry for putting her on the spot.
We'll be publishing a knife crime strategy very soon. What I would say about rounded top knives is I understand the reason why some people think that is part of the solution. I will, of course, consider all of the evidence, but in the end, we have millions of normal kitchen knives available, and so we've got to do a much better job on all of the other areas, such as prevention.
Julian Lewis.
Very briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker, when the Home Secretary is undertaking lessons learned and recommendations for the future, will she look into the question as to whether there is any protective equipment or even disabling equipment of a non-lethal nature that could be issued to staff for use in such an emergency?
Thank you. Well, we'll know that tasers were deployed to bring this incident to a close on Saturday. But let me assure him, even if it's not part of the wider lessons learnt from this case, once all the facts are known, I will, of course, take under consideration the points that he has made.
Nav Mishra.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my thoughts and prayers are with the victims of this brutal attack, and of course my tribute to the amazing courage and bravery of the train crew, but also the first responders. Like my friend from Vauxhall raised, I have serious concerns about the funding arrangements for British Transport Police. So can I encourage my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, to work with the Department of Transport and the Secretary of State for Transport to make sure that the funding arrangements for BTP are good going forward?
Yes, I agree with my honourable friend of the vital role that BTP plays. Their funding for this year is actually 6% higher than previously. They have a hugely important role, and I'm sure the Transport Secretary will do everything she can on the funding front.
Clynnis Meddy.
Mine and Plaid Cymru's colleagues thoughts are with everyone affected by this appalling attack. They're also with the train driver, crew and staff whose quick thinking and decisive action helped protect many from the worst of outcomes. Will the Secretary of State join me in expressing gratitude for their bravery and for showing us all how crucial the presence of officers and sufficient staffing is to our public safety? Surveillance can help catch criminals, but staff on the ground saves lives.
Here, good question.
She makes a very good point, and it is undoubtedly the case that the staff on the ground in this incident saved lives.
Neil Duncan-Jordan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I echo the Home Secretary's comments earlier and the tributes paid in the House already. She will know, though, that the British Transport Police is facing an unprecedented funding deficit that threatens the safety on our railways. There's currently 8.5 million shortfall, with the threat to nearly 300 jobs. Will she therefore meet with the Transport Secretary to discuss how we can fully fund the BTP as a matter of urgency?
Well, I would repeat that the BTP for year 25-26 have been awarded £415 million, which is an increase of almost 6% this year, and I'm sure the wider funding issues are something that the Transport Secretary is considering.
Eastwood.
you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I also want to pay tribute to those who were on the train, the staff and the first responders, as well as members of the public. Could I also ask the Home Secretary to consider comments made by the Right Honourable Member for Staffordshire Merlins in terms of the new ways of radicalisation? The previous Home Secretary also referenced this at the dispatch box, and I will be very keen to hear her views on it. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The Honourable Lady is absolutely right to raise the issue of the wider forms of radicalisation that we are now starting to see in this country. She should rest assured I will ensure, even if it's not relevant to the specific lessons to be drawn from this case, that is very much on the minds of all of us in government as we seek to meet the scale of the new challenge that we face.
Paul Davies.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I fully support the remarks made by the British Transport Police Deputy Chief Constable Stuart Kennedy that the heroic actions of the LNER staff member undoubtedly saved lives. At a recent meeting with the TSSA, they raised concerns about policing budgets and the unique pressures facing the British Transport Police. What discussions has the Minister had with the Treasury to ensure a fair funding settlement, one that safeguards their operational capacity and ensures the continued safety of passengers across our network?
Well, I would repeat the earlier answers I've given in relation to funding, and you should rest assured these are matters that we are discussing with the Transport Department.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In her review, will the Home Secretary undertake to look at the very serious problem of some trains operating without any staff on at all, some very busy trains with insufficient staff on, and hundreds of stations all over the country, particularly in the evenings, with no staff on at all, where the public are obviously, travelling public, are obviously very vulnerable and at risk? Can we pause driver-operated only trains and look at the issues of safety for the public as a whole?
Well, we will be led by the operational assessment made by British Transport Policing in terms of what is required, and you should rest assured the government will make sure that where we have a role to play in terms of keeping people safe on the transport network, we will do so.
Mary Kelly-Foy.
Just thoughts are with the victims of this horrific attack. The RMT union has called for urgent meetings with the government, with police and the industry to ensure that we have the strongest resources and procedures in place to protect staff and passengers. Can she confirm that the Department for Transport and the Home Office will facilitate these meetings as soon as possible?
Well, I can assure her that myself and the Transport Secretary will, of course, be discussing all and any lessons to be drawn from this incident, and that there will be a cross-government response that meets the scale of the challenge that we face.
Adam.
Madam Deputy Speaker, does the Minister share my deep concerns that when heinous incidents like this occur, certain political commentators and sadly certain politicians race to set the narrative behind such attacks as ethnicity or faith-based, or ideally both, rather than focusing on the key crime indicators like socioeconomic deprivation, disintegration of youth services, addiction issues, lack of funding for our police force, or lack of mental health support facilities? Does she agree these factors matter much more than ethnicity, faith, or migration status of the perpetrator?
Well, I think he's getting rather ahead of what facts are currently known about what lay behind this particular attack, so he'll understand if I refrain from making broader conclusions about the motivations here. I think it is important, learning the lessons of what happened after the Southport attacks, that government moves quickly and that police move quickly to make all shareable information available to prevent the spread of disinformation and potential public disorder.
That is the end of the statement on the response to the Huntington train attack. I'll give the front benches a few moments to shuffle over. Order, Ruth Cadbury.
I ask that the record be corrected. I inadvertently said Avanti West Coast. I must have been thinking of the derailment and not the tragic incident, which was, of course, on LNER.
Thank you so much for the correction. Now duly on the record, please. It is. Is it really a point of order, Jim Shannon?
There isn't. In my constituency of Strangford today in Portavogie, a young man was killed in a knife attack. And I think perhaps maybe in order for mention that there, and perhaps the House would join me.
Mr. Jim Shannon, that is very important, Mr. Jim Shannon, but we cannot continue that statement. It is now concluded. Point of order, Chris Phillips.
Very briefly, I think the Home Secretary may have misheard me during my question. I was saying that I was not concerned about disproportionality of stop and search, because when you compare it to the offending population, there is no disproportionality, and I was encouraging further use of the tactics. I wanted to make sure the Home Secretary had heard and received that message.
The Secretary has most definitely got that on the record. I will now continue with the business of the day. The Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Public Office Accountability Bill, second reading.
Now. Prime Minister, to move second reading.
Thank you very much. I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time. Before I come to the bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to put on record in this House my own tribute to the police, the first responders, and in particular to the heroic actions of both the driver and members of staff on board the Doncaster to London train, where such a vile and horrific attack took place this weekend. We all share in the revulsion of this shocking incident, but there's no doubt that their collective action, their brave action, saved countless lives, and I know the whole country is grateful for that. Madam Deputy Speaker, 36 years ago, 97 men, women and children went to a Liverpool football match in Sheffield, an FA Cup semi-final, an occasion of joy, and they never came home to their families. Madam Deputy Speaker, I invite the House just to reflect on that simple statement of fact, what that might feel like. Nearly 15 years ago, when I was Director of Public Prosecutions, I met many of the Hillsborough families during the independent panel led by Bishop James Jones. I will never forget what they told me, their testimony, painful to tell, painful to hear, including the testimony of Jenny Hicks, who told me how she and her husband drove their 2 teenage girls to the game that day, and they had to drive back later with an empty back seat. Every single story, every single experience, painful to the core, unimaginable to the core. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, before I come on to the bill and the contents of the bill, I want to begin this debate with a simple acknowledgement, long overdue, that the British state failed the families and victims of Hillsborough to an almost inhuman level. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, those victims and their families, their strength, their courage, their refusal to give up, a determination no matter what was thrown at them, to fight for people they'll never know or meet, to make sure that they never go through something like this again. They are the reason we stand here today with this bill. They are the reason why it will be known as the Hillsborough Law, and they are the reason, Madam Deputy Speaker, why we say clearly again what should have been said immediately, that their loved ones were unlawfully killed and that they never bore any responsibility for what happened in Sheffield that day. And we say it from this dispatch box today. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, the entire country knows what happened next. You know, we often call Hillsborough a tragedy, but it's more than a tragedy, because the disaster was not down to chance. It was not an accident. It was an injustice. And then further injustice piled on top when the state subjected those families to endure from the police lies and smears against their loved ones, while the central state, the government, aided and abetted them for years and years and years. A cover-up by the very institutions that are supposed to protect and to serve. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is nothing less than a stain on modern history of this country. And yet, can we truly say that Hillsborough was an isolated example? No. Because there's also the Horizon scandal, Grenfell Tower, infected blood, the grooming gangs, Windrush, and more besides. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we should also be blunt that there's a pattern common to all these scandals, that time and again the British state struggled to recognise injustice because of who the victims are, because they're working class, because they're black, because they're women and girls. That is the injustice that this bill seeks to correct, and I hope it commands the support of the whole House. I will.
I'm most grateful. Would you agree there are a couple of things missing from this otherwise excellent bill? The first is an acknowledgement of the role that the media played in covering up many of the wrongs that happened. And the second is a national oversight mechanism, something that will ensure that when recommendations are made, that they are carried out.
I'm grateful for the intervention, and of course we must acknowledge the role of the media and others played in this. This was a cover-up at so many levels. And in relation to oversight mechanisms, I don't think this bill is the place for that, but I do agree with the proposition that where there are inquiries, there needs to be a better way of ensuring that there's follow-through on those inquiries. I will.
The Prime Minister has listed a litany of scandals where there has been cover-up. Would he reflect and include in that the Chinook disaster, where there has been repeated attempts to cover up the truth, the state of the aircraft that was sent out that night, in which we lost so many valued members of our intelligence service? Isn't that something that now a wrong that now needs to be righted?
For raising that. This bill is obviously intended to deal with all of the situations where there needs to be a duty of candour, with consequences if that isn't adhered to. So I'll just make some progress. I will take further intervention. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me now turn to the bill itself, and first of all to the duty of candour. There are three parts to this. First, a new statutory duty of candour. Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the Hillsborough Independent Panel, Bishop James Jones found that over 100 statements by junior police officers have been deliberately altered to remove evidence unfavourable to the South Yorkshire Police. 100 statements have been deliberately altered. Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't think there's anyone in this House who could possibly disagree that we must never let anything like that ever happen again. It is a disgrace, and the bill before the House will tackle it. I'll give way.
Shannon. Can I commend the Prime Minister and Government for bringing this bill forward? I think it enheartens us all to see the content of it. Does the Prime Minister not agree that with the rise of social media, there is more public scrutiny than ever before and less trust in the institutions? The bill and the Prime Minister's outlining is an opportunity to begin that journey of restoring public trust, and we must be mindful that nothing less than accountability can be acceptable. The public understands that mistakes can be made, but they cannot and should not forget when cover-ups take place.
His intervention, and the bill, the legal provisions to ensure this can never happen again as a matter of law. But I've been clear, and I've said to the families on a number of occasions, it's the culture as well that has to change. The culture has to change. So the bill is the architecture, but the culture has to change of the state. Yes, of course.
I'd like to thank him for giving way. Charlotte Hennessy, whose father, Jimmy Hennessy, was unlawfully killed at Hillsborough, has had conversations with the Prime Minister where he has assured her that the law does not need to be watered down and will be delivered in its entirety. She's in the chamber today. Will he make that promise in this House today?
Absolutely. I made that promise. I looked the families in the eye. I made that promise and I meant it. And I say it again from this dispatch box, this bill will not be watered down. This is such an important orchestrating of the relationship between the state and its citizens. It will not be watered down. I'm very pleased to be able to affirm that from this dispatch. I'll take one more and then I'll press on.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for giving way? Does he agree that one of the most powerful lessons from Hillsborough, and indeed the other Grenfell and post office scandals, is that truth delayed is justice denied, and that while this bill rightly places a duty of candour upon public authorities, it must also compel ministers themselves to uphold that same duty when addressing this House, so that accountability begins at the very top, including the misleading information that was given from that dispatch box by his minister last week in relation to the hooligan Maccabi Tel Aviv fans.
I really think, with the families here in the House with us...
Order, Prime Minister. I was trying to pay close attention, but I may have missed it. We do not accuse each other of misleading information at the dispatch box. So be mindful of the language that one is using. Prime Minister.
Thank you. I also think that we owe the families a better way to have this debate than descending into party political point scoring, and I hope we can continue the debate in that way, because this bill will tackle that injustice, so that when tragedy strikes and the state is called to account at inquiries, inquests and other investigations, public officials, from police officers to the highest offices in the land, will be subject to that duty, which means that an injustice like this can never again hide in some dark corner of the state. Madam Deputy Speaker, failure to comply, failure therefore to act with candour, transparency and frankness will now carry criminal penalties, including being sent to prison. Yes.
I am very grateful to the Prime Minister, and as a sponsor of the Honourable Member for Liverpool and East Derby's Private Members Bill, I fully welcome this bill's introduction, and I welcome that protections include criminal offences of misconduct in public life. Could the Prime Minister assure me and others that these new offences will be able to be applied retrospectively?
No, they won't be able to, but that's not a deficiency of this bill. That's a long-standing constitutional rule. It's about what moves in terms of offences that move forward. But can I just make this point, because I do think it's important. These measures will apply across the United Kingdom. And I would like to place on record my thanks to the devolved governments for their collaboration on this. I can also announce the government intends to bring forward an amendment to extend the duty to local authority investigations in England, which will make sure that when an inquiry or investigation is set up by a local authority, for example, the Kerslake inquiry into the Manchester Arena bombings, there can also be the duty of cooperation and candour in the search for the truth. I will.
Extremely grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way, and I recognise the strength of the case that he's making. He will understand the interest the Intelligence and Security Committee has in Clause 6 of this bill, which provides for certain exemptions for those who work for the intelligence agencies. What it then says is that those people should report internally within their organisation information that may be of use to an inquiry or investigation. Would he give some thought to how the government might develop the concept of what then happens to that information, about which the bill is broadly silent? And he will understand that many will be concerned to ensure that when information is reported internally within the intelligence agencies, it nonetheless finds its way to those who should have it, in order to make a reassurance of what the government is seeking to achieve, I think, more broadly in this bill.
Thank you for that intervention. Obviously, a lot of thought's been given to that particular issue of the security and intelligence services. What the bill, therefore, does is to be clear that the duty applies, but has a different way of applying it. And I think that gets the balance right. And obviously, there are various national interests and public interests to protect in so doing. I will give way.
Very grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way, and I congratulate him and thank him for bringing forward this bill. This represents an epic struggle by the Hillsborough families, and they're to be much admired and praised. But this will extend beyond this, as the Prime Minister has said. Can I thank him on behalf of the families who suffered great loss under the auspices of the Tees Eskin Weir Valley NHS Trust, Christy Harnett, Nadia Sharif and Emily Moore, as they were lacking that duty of candour when those terrible tragedies struck. And I hope that he can give consideration to a full judge-led public inquiry, because they are in search of truth, justice and accountability.
Well, I thank him for that intervention, and just for his reassurance and for the reassurance of the House and for the families and all the others affected by these scandals. These are provisions in a bill, they're clauses in a bill, they will soon be sections in a piece of legislation. But they're more than that. They're a changing of the nature of the relationship of the state and its duties to its people. And that is so important. Yes, this is the legal architecture, but something much bigger than this has to be put in place. I will take this intervention and I'll come behind.
I thank the Prime Minister greatly, and I welcome this bill. Could I ask him to reassure me and my constituents that those organisations which are contractors to public authorities and public bodies are covered by the provisions of this bill as well, because it's important that where responsibilities defrayed to other bodies, that they too are captured by the clauses in this bill.
She anticipates my next point, but I will make it and then I'll take the intervention from behind, because we have to recognise that some scandals, such as the Post Office Horizon scandal, the boundaries between the public sector and the private sector are complicated. And Clause 4 in this bill applies the duty to some private bodies for that very reason, in answer to her question. In particular, those delivering public functions, those with relevant health and safety responsibilities, as well as relevant public sector contractors. So in the Home Office, in the Post Office case, Fujitsu, for example, for that very reason, because we have to recognise that it's blurred, and we need to make sure that the duty extends appropriately. Yes. I will. No, I'll give way here.
I'm grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way. He knows that for over 2 decades, the legal system failed to provide truth and justice to the Hillsborough families. And it was only a non-legal process, the Hillsborough Independent Panel, that finally set things right on the road to truth, justice and accountability. Does he see any prospect, therefore, of us including in the legislation at a later stage, provision to ensure that the Hillsborough Independent Panel type process can be offered to families who are involved in future disasters to try and circumvent this long-standing failure of the criminal justice system and the justice system to offer truth and accountability quickly to families?
Start by thanking her for her work and campaign on this over many, many years. And she makes a really powerful point about the independent panel. I first met Bishop James Jones 15 or plus years ago now, and I genuinely think he was amongst the first to listen properly, knowing what listening means, to those that were giving evidence to his panel, which is why he was so well received and respected in the report that he made, and we will certainly give consideration as to whether panels of that like in future can serve a useful purpose. I'll take the other intervention.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way, and he's been very generous in taking all our questions. And I want to congratulate him for introducing this particular piece of legislation. But can I just ask if the duty of candour can be applied fully to all investigations, including independent panels, and not just statutory inquiries, and that the command responsibility must personally rest with those in charge and not simply the institutions?
Well, it does apply to non-statutory inquiries, so her point is covered within the bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll press on. The second part of the duty of candour is a professional duty of candour for all public servants, because the Nolan principles of public service, honesty, integrity, accountability, selflessness, objectivity, openness and leadership, they're not some kind of optional extra, but the very essence of public service itself. So every public authority will now be legally required to adopt a code of ethical conduct based on these principles and set out consequences for staff who do not comply, including disciplinary sanctions up to and including gross misconduct. Yes.
Giving Way, this piece of legislation is a huge step for accountability and transparency for families who must feel like the most impossible of circumstances. Some of those families are living in my constituency and next door in Corby, who are still trying to get clarity about the possibility of dumped toxic waste and contaminated land causing health complications. So could the Prime Minister spell out how this bill will ensure that any public official who abuses their power and tries to cover it up will be held accountable?
Yes, I can confirm that, and I want to emphasise the point again, because it is so significant that out of the most unbelievable suffering, these families, these victims, have pushed for a change that took far too long, but will now benefit and safeguard people that they will never meet, they will never know. And I find that kind of campaigning humbling, and we thank them for it. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll just make a bit of progress and then we'll take further interventions. Finally, in relation to the duty of candour, it's underpinned by a new criminal offence of misleading the public, which is aimed squarely at public servants who willfully mislead the British people in a reckless, intentional or improper way. Cases like Hillsborough, where lies and dishonesty from the state grievously harmed the very people it was supposed to serve, and that must never happen again. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the bill is not just about the duty of candour itself, because anyone familiar with how justice failed families and victims must also recognise that the lack of parity in our legal system played a significant role. I remember Margaret Aspinall, who I met many years ago now, who's with us today, telling me that she had to scrape together every last penny for legal representation, including the money paid out by insurers for the death of her son, James, who at the time was pretty much the same age as my son, who comes to football with me. That's what she had to do, and we have to recognise that injustice piled on the other injustices. Yes, of course.
I'm very grateful to the Prime Minister, and can I also join those across this House in welcoming this important legislation and welcoming and aligning myself to all the points the Prime Minister has made. Will the Prime Minister also join me in paying tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Liverpool West Derby, for his tireless campaign to push for this law to reach the statute books?
Hear, hear.
And the Prime Minister is absolutely right. Grieving families have faced the might of the state alone, forced to crowdfund lawyers while public bodies hired whole legal armies. Does he agree that by guaranteeing legal aid at the inquest, we can finally end those David and Goliath battles for justice once and for all?
Hear, hear.
Well, can I absolutely extend that tribute to the member for Liverpool West Derby, who I think was at the game and has campaigned tirelessly in this place and beyond this place to help us get to the position today where we can introduce this bill. So I do pay tribute to him. I'm very pleased to do so from this dispatch box as we introduce this important legislation. I'll just make some progress and I will come to the honourable member. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the question of parity, what happened and happens in so many cases is that families either have to scrimp and try to find the money for legal representation or have none. And what are they met with at inquests and inquiries? The Hillsborough families were met with this. The working people who have had to save for justice, they were met time and again by armies of state-funded lawyers, the deep pockets of the state taxpayer money harnessed for the explicit purpose of fighting against justice. So this bill aims to correct this inequality. So justice and the state serve all, with a new duty on public authorities to engage lawyers at inquest and inquiries only where necessary and proportionate, and to ensure that their representatives behave with the sensitivity and respect that victims and their families deserve. Madam Deputy Speaker, the bill will also ensure that no bereaved family has to face an inquest alone, with the largest expansion of legal aid in a decade, granting access to free legal aid for all inquests where the state is an interested party. so that working people like Margaret and the Hillsborough families will never again be faced with such inequality on legal representation, or, as in many cases, simply left with none. I will take the intervention, I promise.
I thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister.